There's this moment in August 1944 that changed everything about how wars are fought. And it wasn't a battle. It wasn't some brilliant general strategy. It was trucks. Just trucks. But what happened with those trucks? What those drivers did? Well, the German High Command couldn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. And by the time they understood what they were seeing, it was already too late. Before we go any further, listen, grab yourself something to drink, maybe settle in, because this is one of those stories that sounds impossible until you see the actual numbers. And I need you to stick with me here, all the way through, because what I'm about to tell you, it's not what they taught us in school. Hit that subscribe button too, because we're digging into the real history, the kind that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew. All right? So, August 1944, somewhere in East Prussia, deep in what they called the Wolfslayer, Hitler's headquarters, there's this general, Alfred Jodl. Career officer, brilliant mind, one of those men who understood warfare down to the mathematics of it. And he's sitting there reviewing intelligence reports from France, where the Americans have just broken out of Normandy. His staff has calculated everything precisely. The Allied armies, they've pushed over 400 miles inland from those beaches. General Patton's Third Army is leading the charge, moving fast, faster than anyone expected. But Jodl, he's not worried. Not yet. Because he knows something. Something every German general learned the hard way in Russia. He leans back, looks at his officers, and he says it plain. The Americans have outrun their logistics. See, an armored division, just one, burns through 150,000 gallons of fuel every single day when it's advancing. That's the reality of mechanized warfare. And Patton's got multiple divisions, all of them 400 miles from their supply depots back at the Normandy beaches. The math to Jodl, it's simple, inescapable even. Patton's tanks are going to run dry, maybe in days, maybe in hours. And when they do, the German army can regroup, can establish defensive lines along the Seine River, maybe hold until winter comes and everything freezes into a stalemate. What Jodl didn't know, couldn't know, was that at that exact moment, 125 miles away, there were already 5,958 trucks rolling eastward in a convoy so long you couldn't see the end of it. Headlights blazing, middle of the day, middle of the night, didn't matter. No blackout discipline, no hiding, just rolling. Moving 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. They called it the Red Ball Express, and it was about to teach the German general staff that they didn't understand modern warfare nearly as well as they thought they did. Now, here's what made this so, revolutionary. The people driving those trucks, about 23,000 of them eventually, about 75% were African American soldiers, black men, in a still segregated army, keeping the most celebrated white generals' forces in motion. Men who couldn't eat in white restaurants back home, couldn't use white facilities in most of America. They were the ones proving Hitler's whole racial ideology wrong, one delivery at a time. But let me back up, because you need to understand why the Germans were so confident this couldn't work. The Wehrmacht, that's the German armed forces, they'd pioneered blitzkrieg, right? Lightning war. They understood combined arms. They'd revolutionized modern combat. And they knew intimately what happens when your supply lines can't keep up with your tanks. They lived through it in Russia. Their advance into the Soviet Union had stalled not because the Russians stopped them initially, but because they simply couldn't supply their forces across those vast distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads, roads that weren't really roads at all, more like suggestions of where roads might someday be. And 80% of German military transport was still horse-drawn. Horses in 1944. Meanwhile, their Panzer spearheads were racing ahead, and the gap between the tanks and the supplies just kept growing until everything ground to a halt. So when German intelligence started tracking American supply requirements in August 1944, the math seemed absolutely clear. A single Sherman tank got half a mile per gallon on roads, worse when going cross-country. An infantry division needed 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division, 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a 60-mile front. That's 12,000 tons every single day, transported 400 miles from the beaches over roads the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat through a transportation network they'd spent weeks demolishing. General Siegfried Westphal, who'd become chief of staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, he sat down and calculated it all out on August 20th. And his conclusion, his very confident conclusion, was this: even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. He was wrong. So very wrong. See, on August 25, 1944, at 2 in the afternoon, in a requisitioned French chateau near Laval, there's this meeting happening. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Iles of the Motor Transport Service, he's facing a room full of skeptical officers. The situation is stark. Patton's consuming supplies faster than any army in history. Traditional supply methods, railway transport, scheduled convoys, depot-to-depot distribution, it's all collapsed under the strain. And Iles, he announces something that sounds completely insane. We're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches straight to the front lines. Every vehicle runs 20 hours out of 24, no stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily, minimum. The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took priority over everything. Absolute priority. No delays, no exceptions. The plan defied every principle of German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks going forward, one for empties returning. 24-hour operations with headlights blazing, completely abandoning blackout discipline in a war where everyone else hid from aircraft. A no-stop policy except for fuel and mechanical failure. 5-minute convoy intervals, maintaining an average speed of 35 miles per hour. Mobile maintenance units every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints pulling any vehicle doing less than 25 miles per hour off the road entirely. Colonel Charles Thrasher, reviewing the projected numbers, he said what everyone was thinking. We need 140 truck companies, nearly 6,000 vehicles, operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written. Impossible. But within 36 hours, it was operational. August 25, 1944, drivers from the 39 16th Quartermaster Truck Company, most of them black soldiers, they climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks. They called them Deuce and a Half. Loaded up with 105mm artillery shells, ammunition bound for Patton's guns 300 miles east at Mellon. And they started rolling. These drivers, they developed their own culture almost immediately. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They created their own traffic rules. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately, no questions. Mechanical failures got pushed into ditches, no time for roadside repairs. Any truck below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. By August 28th, just 2 days in, German reconnaissance units started reporting something they couldn't quite comprehend. A unit from the 116th Panzer Division radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline. We estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour passing our position. The Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything. Everything German doctrine taught. Headlights at night invited air attack. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets. No spacing between vehicles meant a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned, almost contemptuous of the danger. General Edgar Fouchinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, he personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters, you can hear the alarm in it. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night without pause. They don't hide, they don't disperse, they don't follow any rules we understand. This isn't military science. It's mass production applied to warfare. And that right there, that's the moment when the German General Staff started to realize they were fighting something entirely different than they'd prepared for. The numbers the Red Ball achieved in just that first week, August 25th to 31st, they defied every German calculation of what was logistically possible. 89,939 tons of supplies delivered. Daily average of 12,848 tons. Round-trip distance of 686 miles. Those 5,958 trucks making 1.5 trips daily. The operation itself was consuming 300,000 gallons of fuel just to keep running. German logistics specialists, when they captured American documents with these numbers, they dismissed them as propaganda, impossible, had to be impossible. But the numbers were real, and they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed to mock everything German logistics officers knew. These were men whose army still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of transport, remember? And they're watching convoys depart every 5 minutes. Average convoy size, 67 vehicles. Load per vehicle, 5 tons standard, often overloaded to 7. Time to cover 350 miles one way, 14 hours average. Turnaround time at each end, 2 hours. At any given moment, there were 5,000 vehicles in constant motion. The innovations came hourly. See, when trucks broke down, and about 1,800 did daily, mobile maintenance units performed repairs right on the roadside. The mechanics developed a triage system, 15 minutes to fix it or push it off the road. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When the designated Red Ball route became congested, drivers just created alternate paths. They commandeered French buses to move personnel. They borrowed German vehicles, slapped olive drab paint on them, pressed them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges, using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed. The Germans, observing this organized chaos, they couldn't comprehend it. German doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, yet their system accelerated rather than collapse. But here's what really stunned German observers: American fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own operations, more than many German armies received for all purposes combined. Yet fuel never ran short, never. Turns out the Americans had created something else nobody knew about: Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean. They'd laid fuel pipelines across the English Channel. By September 1944, fuel was flowing through underwater pipes German intelligence hadn't even detected. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route. Tanker trucks ran their own parallel convoy system. No vehicle waited more than 10 minutes for refueling. General Walter Warlimont, observing from aerial reconnaissance photographs, he put it plainly: the Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline just moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. This is industrial overflow. And that fuel, those supplies, they multiplied Patton's speed exponentially. German doctrine calculated that an armored division could sustain maybe 30 to 40 miles daily under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, they averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in morning operations. Halted for resupply at noon, Red Ball trucks were already waiting, fuel and ammunition ready to go. They advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon, 67 miles in a single day. This shattered German defensive planning, which assumed maximum 30 miles daily advances. General Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare himself, reviewing the reports in East Prussia, he initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted radio traffic confirmed it. And here's what really disturbed the Germans. The Americans were broadcasting their positions openly, without code. They were supremely confident in their ability to move faster than Germans could react. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic for Wehrmacht planning. Every assumption about American military capability required revision. The report contained observations that defied German military science. Let me read you some of this. Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously, abandoning damaged trucks rather than repairing them. Drivers operated on stimulants for days straight, violating every principle of personnel management. No camouflage discipline whatsoever, making the entire system vulnerable to air attack that never came. Mechanical failure rates of 30% daily, simply overwhelmed by redundancy. Fuel consumption that would bankrupt any European military. Field Marshal Walter Modell's response revealed growing desperation. If these reports are accurate, we face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. Now, those Red Ball Express drivers, they paid a physical price German observers couldn't see from their positions. Drivers operated for 72 straight hours at a stretch, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine, amphetamines, to keep them awake. Accidents killed 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on damaged roads, burned when overheated engines ignited. Yet morale remained extraordinarily high. These men, mostly African Americans, denied equal rights at home. They understood they were making history. They were proving Hitler's racial theories wrong with every mile driven, every ton delivered. Every time a black sergeant calculated weight distributions faster than a German engineer could. Every time a black driver made decisions in minutes that would take German officers hours of consultation. Every time they proved themselves not just equal, but superior. They were winning a different kind of war. Captured German officers provided testimony that's remarkable when you read it now. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, he told his interrogators, "We knew we'd lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule. You waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The psychological impact on German forces, it was devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear American trucks all night, every night. Endless motors, endless supplies. They had 3 rounds per rifle. The Americans were bringing millions of rounds. The sound itself became psychological warfare. The vehicles themselves amazed German engineers when they got their hands on them. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, it represented mass production perfection. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles by war's end, more trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. The trucks featured innovations Germans hadn't implemented at all. All-wheel drive as standard, not exception. automatic tire inflation systems, waterproofing that allowed 30-inch fording, engines that ran on low-quality fuel without modification, heaters that actually worked in winter. But more stunning than the vehicles was American maintenance philosophy. Where Germans rebuilt engines, Americans replaced them. Where Germans rationed parts, Americans discarded entire vehicles for minor problems. Where Germans had master mechanics who could fix anything given enough time, Americans had thousands of competent mechanics who could perform 80% of repairs quickly. As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adapted with speed that stunned German planning officers who were accustomed to weeks of preparation for major logistics changes. When the original route to Chartres became insufficient, Americans created extensions overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond from Cherbourg to railroad transfer points, the Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, the ABC, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers required weeks to plan similar operations. The Americans just painted new markers, assigned trucks, and started rolling. The predominance of African American drivers created cognitive dissonance for German racial theorists. Nazi ideology declared blacks inferior, incapable of technical tasks, lacking initiative. Yet these drivers were performing logistics miracles that German forces couldn't match. The African American soldiers, they understood the irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, which made them drive even harder. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers found their worldview shattered. Working alongside African American sergeants who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers could, who spoke better English than German English instructors, who treated prisoners fairly despite everything Nazi propaganda had told them about racial behavior. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure Germans deemed impossible to create under combat conditions. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while the operation was running at full capacity. The bridge at Mons had been destroyed by German engineers specifically to halt American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated replacement would require 6 weeks minimum. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours, while Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads. German engineers observed American construction methods with amazement. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. They built faster than Germans could destroy, created infrastructure that appeared overnight in French fields. One Red Ball Express achievement particularly stunned German artillery officers: ammunition supply rates that exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. American artillery units fired without restriction, a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of Metz fortifications in September 1944, the 19th Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every round, plus 20% surplus. German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. American guns fired continuously for hours. German artillery officers calculated that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided it without pause. The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles at rates that would have paralyzed any other military. By late September, mechanical attrition reached staggering proportions. Average vehicle life 10,000 miles instead of the normal 30,000 miles. Daily deadline rate 30% of all vehicles. Engines replaced 500 weeklies. Tires consumed 10,000 weeklies. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned, over 5,000. Yet the operation never slowed. American production anticipated such losses. Ships arrived in French ports weekly carrying hundreds of new trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in 2 days and thrown into convoys. German calculations showed Americans destroying more trucks weekly than the Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet American transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved something Germans thought impossible: logistics faster than consumption. French civilians along the Red Ball route witnessed American abundance that contradicted years of German occupation scarcity. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Red Ball Express drivers, particularly African Americans, often shared their rations with French civilians despite regulations. Every stop, children would gather. Drivers would give them chocolate, cigarettes, soap. The contrast with German occupation was stark. Americans gave away casually what Germans rationed strictly. German intelligence reported the propaganda impact. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The population that accepted our occupation now actively opposes it. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even the Red Ball struggled to maintain supply rates. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing. Vehicles were disintegrating. German intelligence detected the strain. General Hasso von Manteuffel reported September 8th. American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. But American adaptability again surprised the Germans. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized, created intermediate transfer points, cutting individual runs to 350 miles, implemented driver rotation systems, established forward maintenance bases, doubled the number of assigned vehicles. By September 12, 1944, tonnage delivery had actually increased. The crisis that should have halted Patton only made the system stronger. Supplementing the Red Ball Express, Americans implemented another logistics solution Germans deemed impossible: large-scale aerial supply. C-47 transport aircraft began delivering critical supplies directly to forward units. Each aircraft carried 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe at its peak had managed 300 tons daily to Stalingrad, considered that a maximum effort. The Americans used transport aircraft like trucks. No concerns about fighter escorts, no fuel limitations. They assumed losses and overwhelmed them with numbers. The Wehrmacht couldn't compete with this industrial arithmetic. The Red Ball Express operated under command principles that violated German military hierarchy. Junior officers made decisions reserved for generals in the Wehrmacht. Sergeants commanded operations larger than German colonels managed. This decentralization baffled German observers. American logistics operated without apparent central control. Every lieutenant acted like a general, every sergeant like a colonel. Chaos should have resulted. Instead, they achieved efficiency the Wehrmacht couldn't match with rigid hierarchy. By October 1944, advancing railheads began to reduce Red Ball Express requirements. The operation that was supposed to last 10 days had continued for 82 days, delivering 412,000 tons of supplies over 122 million ton miles. German commanders, now fighting on their own borders, reflected on what they'd witnessed. Field Marshal Model wrote in his final report, We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, logistics is strategy. The final Red Ball Express statistics defied every German calculation of logistical possibility. 82 days of operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 222 million ton miles, 5,958 vehicles average, peak of 7,000, 23,000 total drivers employed, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily, 40,000 tons of ammunition delivered to Patton alone, 15 million rations transported, 135,000 tons of medical supplies. Reviewing these figures in captivity, German officers admitted that they had calculated American logistics based on European precedent. They had multiplied their best performance by 3 and assumed that was American maximum. They were wrong by a factor of 10. Beyond tonnage and distance, the Red Ball Express achieved something more profound. It destroyed German faith in their own military superiority. Wehrmacht officers who had dismissed Americans as soft and mechanically dependent watched those same Americans achieve logistics miracles through determination and industrial abundance. German prisoners of war would stand silent at prison camp fences, counting passing Red Ball trucks. Some wept. They understood what it meant, not just that Americans could supply their armies, but that they could waste more than Germans could produce. They were watching their worldview collapse, one truck at a time. The Red Ball Express forced an unexpected racial reckoning within the American military itself. The operation's success depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who were still segregated, denied equal treatment, barred from many combat roles. General Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in September 1944, witnessed the contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching colored drivers who'd been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.'" The success created pressure for integration that contributed to military desegregation 3 years later. African American soldiers had proved in France what they always knew. Given the tools and opportunity, they would match anyone. The Red Ball was their combat, and they won it decisively. German racial theorists struggled to explain the contradiction. SS racial science publications simply stopped mentioning American logistics operations. The evidence was too overwhelming to deny, too damaging to acknowledge. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, individual stories of heroism emerged. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai. Fell asleep at the wheel 3 times, continued after being revived by other drivers each time. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it as procedure required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital. Jumped out as flames reached the cab. The supplies saved wounded soldiers from both armies. These stories, multiplied thousands of times, revealed American military culture to observing Germans: individual initiative, calculated risk-taking, mission accomplishment over regulatory compliance. Desperately, German forces attempted to create their own version of the Red Ball Express in late 1944. Operation Greif during the Battle of the Bulge included plans for captured American trucks to create German supply lines. The effort failed immediately. German drivers couldn't maintain American speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment fast enough. German fuel supplies couldn't sustain the consumption rates. Most fundamentally, Germans couldn't replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. The commander reported, We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat. The winter of 1944-45 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate test. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have stopped wheeled transport. German doctrine stated wheeled logistics became impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express continued. Drivers wrapped chains on tires, poured alcohol in radiators, kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but tonnage delivery continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistics system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for historical records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General Friedrich Schultz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days." The most insightful analysis came from General Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg, but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible." The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces. The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944. Vehicles destroyed, fuel consumed, roads damaged, French claims for damage. German staff officers accustomed to managing scarcity found the figure incomprehensible. Yet Americans considered it cheap. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, created the modern American logistics industry. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours, you can move the world. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culminating point, where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war." His operations officer suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe. Rundstedt's response revealed complete understanding. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We'd need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production. We don't have 200 aircraft total." Behind the statistics were human stories that revealed American character to German observers. drivers who hadn't slept for 3 days refusing relief because their trucks might not make it through, mechanics working in freezing rain to keep convoys rolling, teenagers lying about their age to drive trucks. Such stories multiplied throughout the operation created a mythology that demoralized German forces. The Americans were not soft as propaganda claimed. They drove themselves harder than Germans drove horses, but they did it voluntarily, not from fear. This made them more dangerous than German doctrine had understood. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda more powerful than any planned operation. German units could hear the convoys at night, endless streams of motors that never stopped. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized troops as effectively as actual logistics. The knowledge that Americans had unlimited supplies while Germans rationed their last ammunition created despair that undermined combat effectiveness. In November 1944, with rail lines partially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued, but its methods had revolutionized military logistics permanently. The concept of continuous, high-volume, wasteful but effective supply became American military doctrine. The final innovation was the speed of dissolution. The massive operation, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, hundreds of installations, disappeared in 72 hours. Troops reassigned, vehicles redistributed, routes returned to civilian use. Germans required months to create smaller operations and years to dissolve them. Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and built something better. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many cited the Red Ball Express specifically as demonstrating the hopelessness of continued resistance. General Hasso von Montefiore stated at his interrogation, "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer? "Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers." In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. The ceremony recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat operations, but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. They were black soldiers, mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition during the war. But they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern warfare, logistics is not support, it is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics dismissed it as wasteful, undisciplined, impossible to sustain. 82 days later, those same generals were signing surrender documents, finally understanding that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial abundance had overwhelmed military excellence, that logistics had become strategy itself. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact, it echoed through military history, changed how armies think about supply, changed how wars are fought. It proved that in the modern war, victory belongs not to the bravest soldiers or brightest generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, the farthest. The highways of France still bear the scars, you know. Ruts worn by overloaded trucks, bridges hastily repaired, roadsides where abandoned vehicles once sat. But the greatest monument to the operation isn't physical. It's the speed of Allied victory. Every day the war shortened saved thousands of lives. The Red Ball Express shortened it by months, maybe more. There's a quote from a German officer whose name we've lost to history. It was recorded by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. The officer was standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks. He said to his captors in accented English, "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of warfare, one delivery at a time. But you know what? That's not even half the story. Because what happened next, what those drivers faced, what the Red Ball Express revealed about America itself, that's where this story gets really interesting. The human cost, the racial reckoning, the innovations that changed warfare forever, the individual acts of heroism that German officers couldn't comprehend. We're just getting started. I'm splitting this into 2 parts because there's too much here, too many stories that deserve to be told properly. Part 2 is going to show you what the textbooks never mention, the price those drivers paid, the contradictions they lived with, the moment German prisoners realized everything they'd been taught was a lie, and the legacy that changed how wars are fought to this very day. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because part 2 drops soon, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss what comes next. The Red Ball Express was just warming up. And I'll see you in part 2.